Hey, Colts Nation, do you want peace of mind while surfing the internet and while also viewing our content safely? Well, now you can, thanks to our sponsor, Aura. It's no doubt, guys, with the internet becoming so massive and new information being put out there every single day, identity theft has become one of the biggest forms of threat in the world. It's important that you guys remain safe out there on the internet while doing all the things that you do. Let Aura be able to help you. Some of you may have things like Aura already, but this allows you to protect everything on all of your devices all in one place, rather than having several different apps all at once, making it easier to track everything and helps your wallet. Aura monitors the dark web to protect your personal information. It checks all of your devices for malware, gives you guys one-click VPNs to help you when you're shopping online, and so much more. You can even get credit score checks and alerts for suspicious activities if something's going on with your cards. If you want to stop people from getting access to your personal information online, be sure to go to our sponsor, aura.com/bringthejuice, or scan the QR code and get a 14-day free trial and see for yourself the benefits Aura can provide for you. Allow Aura to protect you so you can get back to surfing the internet safely and enjoy your favorite Colts content creators.
What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another episode, guys. The Indianapolis Colts had their day one practice. Nothing really in depth when it comes to the first day of practice. The Colts have Thursday off. We'll be back at it on Friday. So with that, we wanted to take some time before things get really intense and kind of talk about some position battles that we are watching. We have 5 in particular that we want to highlight today, 5 position battles that we are going to be watching very closely. Derek, I think the way that we can do this, if you're good with this, is we can start with the least interesting one, if that's the way to put it. I don't know if that's quite the way I want to put it, but the one that we're watching out of the 5 that we're least interested in, we're still interested in it, obviously, and go all the way up to the most interesting one that we are watching and the more highlighted one that we're going to be watching as well. So if you're good with that, we can kind of do that.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think, Derek, the first one we got to talk about when it comes to, the looking at the position battles, and I put this one at 5 just strictly because it's going to be for a backup role. And for me, that is the RB2, the backup running back position. There's 3 guys I have in mind here. Zach Moss, who was the RB2 last year and actually was the RB1 for a while when Jonathan Taylor was still dealing with that ankle injury. And he may, get more of a chance of a run here with Taylor still being on the PUP list at this point. And then obviously everything else that's going on with the contract. We don't know all what's going to happen with Jonathan Taylor right now. So Zach Moss has an opportunity nonetheless here early on in camp versus Deion Jackson, who, was more of that RB2, more of that receiving back last year for the Colts, and then the newcomer Evan Hull, who the Colts drafted out of Northwestern in the 6th round. So, Derek, when you look at this position group, 3 guys that have some different skill sets. Moss is probably more of that bigger back out of the 3, a guy that can be more of a downhill runner, if you will, between the tackles type of guy. Deion Jackson, like I talked about, a little more of a receiving back, and Evan Hull, just strictly a receiving back. So what do you ultimately think, looking at this position battle, that you think will maybe make one of these players separate themselves from the other 2?
Yeah, I think it's funny that we're talking about this group. I think mainly the only reason why that we would be having this conversation is because of the fact that we've heard the Jonathan Taylor news. So, we're having to have this conversation in case something bad happens there. So, again, looking at who potentially has the edge, Moss versus Jackson versus Hall, clearly what we saw last year, Zach Moss was really doing a fantastic job at the end of the year. Deion Jackson was, trying his best to fill in the role in the shoes of a Jonathan Taylor while he was injured. And of course, Evan Hall, who in the first practice of training camp got the majority of the first reps with the first team. So very interesting to see Evan Hall really taking that spot there. Not sure if that is a inclination at all or if that just was coincidence. Not 100% certain on that. But nevertheless, I mean, it's definitely will be a little bit interesting to, kind of think about going forward and who might potentially be jumping each other.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that at least two of these players are going to be on your final 53 man. It's just who is technically that RB2. And you could even argue like that RB3. Like who's going to see the most playing time behind Jonathan Taylor? Who's going to kind of be that guy that's going to spell him when he, needs a rest or whatever. Like who's going to be that guy? And that's an interesting thing. And so we'll obviously monitor the Jonathan Taylor situation, but regardless, I would have put this on the list regardless of that situation. So I think Moss versus Jackson versus Hall is going to be interesting. And then, between those, the two guys that are behind him for 3, it'll be interesting as well. Primarily if it's the 2 receiving backs, kind of who do the Colts decide to go with over the other. So really going to be interesting there. I think another one here that's going to be interesting, Derek, is the tight end room. I mean, I think we would all presume that Jelani Woods will be your tight end 1 and Kylan Granson will be your tight end 2. But beyond that, there's a ton of guys here. Will Mallory, who obviously is starting off on PUP, so that's not a great start dealing with a foot injury. You have Mo Alley-Cox still, who's been in the building for a long time. You brought in different guys. You have Andrew Ogletree, who's coming back. So there's a lot of different guys here that are going to potentially be trying to get 3 or potentially 4 spots here. So the tight end position is one that is super intriguing, Derek, because there's just so many different guys that offer so many different skill sets. The guy that I think is the biggest unknown right now is Ogletree, just because of what he did last year in training camp. And he looks pretty good, looks like he's ready to go, in that charity softball game that Quentin Nelson had, like last week or earlier this week. He looked good. His ACL looked good. So definitely excited to see him here in year number 2 if he's fully healthy, which it looks like he's near or is fully healthy. Really excited for him. But Derek, what are you looking for, and what do you think it will take for that number 3 tight end position? And, if you had to choose here, who's a guy you think probably has the inside track right now and why?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, we obviously know about Jelani Woods. We obviously know what Kylan Granson's skill set could potentially provide in this offensive system with Shane Steichen. That's going to be the big question, right? I mean, Mo Alley-Cox, I would imagine, is definitely going to be tight end number 3, just for the sake of we know the kind of blocking ability that he has and a couple other things. And also, if anyone notices that my internet's kind of going bad, we're having bad storms here, so that probably explains why. But anyways, yeah, I mean, the rest of these guys, you're right. You talk about Drew Ogletree, you talk about Will Mallory, you're talking about some of these other guys that are trying to fight for this spot. It's hard because you drafted Will Mallory for a reason, right? Like Shane Steichen and company drafted Will Mallory for a reason, to want to keep him on this roster. But yet you have Ogletree, who is just coming back, who last year was the best tight end you had on the whole roster in training camp. And you then have him come back, and Ballard was talking about yesterday how excited he is that Ogletree is going to be back. So, I mean, I'm split. I have no idea what direction this coaching staff and group is going to go with this third tight end room. So it could basically just be a flip of a coin at this point.
Right. I mean, I think you would wager to say probably Mo, just because he's been in the system. He's not coming off any serious injury, like all those things. But for me, Ogletree is the wild card, right? I mean, Mo, we know what Mo is, right? He's a serviceable enough tight end, not really offers you a ton in terms of the passing department. At least he hasn't yet. He's obviously got the size, but, he has some, I think, to be desired when it comes to actual athleticism and being able to move with the football. I mean, like Jelani Woods, to give you reference, is bigger than Mo and can move tremendously faster. So he's a guy that I think definitely we know what he is, but Ogletree's a wild card. And obviously Will Mallory, when he gets back, he's going to be a wild card. It sounds like his injury's not super serious, so hopefully he'll be off in a couple days or maybe a week or so. So that will definitely bear monitoring for sure. Another position group that I'm really interested to see, Derek, is kind of that number 3/slot wide receiver position. Two guys that I have in mind here for that. Isaiah McKenzie, who you brought over in free agency, who, offered that at Buffalo last couple of years in Buffalo. He's got the speed. He's got, the elusiveness, if you will. Obviously he handled some stuff in the punt return department and stuff like that in Buffalo. And then he brought in Josh Downs in the 3rd round, who a lot of people thought was going to go a lot earlier than that, who offers you some options in the slot as well. So regardless, both of these guys are going to contribute. It's just like who's going to kind of be that primary slot guy and who's going to kind of be that fall behind him wide receiver 4 potentially. What are your thoughts between these two guys? McKenzie obviously being the veteran, playing with a quarterback like Josh Allen, playing in that Buffalo system for a couple of years, coming off of a career year in terms of yardage. And then Josh Downs, who is a rookie, but definitely feels like he has some stuff that you really look for and he gets you really excited about what he could potentially do in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Isaiah McKenzie and you talk about, obviously, he's kind of the Swiss Army knife that Paris Campbell was last year, right? You get him to utilize him in punt returns, kick returns. You can use him in the slot. You can use him in the backfield. You can use him in a lot of different ways. I mean, he's a shifty, very accelerant kind of player. Just a big play waiting to happen if he gets the right situation. But at the same time, I just sit there and I think to myself, there's just no way I can look at Josh Downs and not think to myself that Josh Downs can't be the primary slot guy in this wide receiver room. I know that he's a little bit smaller in stature, which, at the end of the day, won't really affect his playing time much in the slot, because if you're doing slot stuff, then for the most part, you're going to be on the field to throw. You're throwing the football more times than you're not. So, at that point in time, it's really kind of a given. It's not like they're going to ask him to go out there and run block that much. They wouldn't do the same with McKenzie either. But I just look from a pure reception standpoint, what everyone expects Josh Downs to be in the future with Anthony Richardson. People expect him to be putting up seasons like what Hunter Renfrow did 3 years ago. Remember when Hunter Renfrow had that 100 catch season for 1,300 yards and and over around a dozen touchdowns? That's the kind of numbers that people are thinking that Josh Downs even in the immediate future could resemble. Not necessarily 100 catches, but could be that immediate guy that in any situation Anthony Richardson could go to and know that Josh Downs is going to catch it, right? Because, his skill set is literally like that of a 6'4" Randy Moss. Just the only difference is he's just small. It's literally the only thing that's against Josh Downs. And I think to Josh Downs too, we saw the draft stuff and how he reacted to being drafted by the Indianapolis Colts and, the look of determination in his eye and how he interacted with Anthony Richardson right off the bat. So I'm thinking that I don't see any way that Josh Downs does not get the number 1 slot position here.
It's definitely one that we'll be monitoring for sure. It'll be interesting to see who does come out on top. Obviously, McKenzie has the NFL experience on his side, but Downs has that chip on his shoulder that you definitely can't count a player like him out. So that'll be one that definitely these guys will both contribute. It's just, who will contribute more, who will be that primary guy. That's something we'll definitely be watching for sure. All right, we have 2 other positions we want to talk about. The first one I want to talk about, Derek, is the cornerback position. This one, talk about a position. If you had to ask me, what's one position that is completely wide open? Cornerback would be that position that I would throw in there, because outside of Kenny Moore, who obviously is coming back, contract year, hopefully he plays well and, is going to be that leader in that locker room for this young secondary. Outside of him, Derek, I have no clue who's going to be your starting two outside corners. No clue. I mean, could it be Juju Brents? Could it be Darius Rush? Could it be Jalen Jones? Could it be Dallas Flowers? Could it be Tony Brown? The list goes on and on. All these guys who really haven't played a lot of meaningful snaps at the NFL level. A couple guys being rookies, but Dallas Flowers played a little bit last year. Tony Brown's played a little bit. But other than Kenny Moore, I mean, Derek, you lost probably over 1,000 snaps between the three corners, probably more than that, honestly. I'd have to go back and check. But you lost three of your starting corners last year. Three of your starting corners at one point you lost this offseason. And obviously the Colts said, and Ballard said, they decided they were going to go young. Nobody could have anticipated the Isaiah Rodgers situation. So, I get that. But also it's just man, you go from a really experienced group last year to virtually nothing outside of Kenny Moore in the experience standpoint. So who's going to step it up, Derek? That's the ultimate question. And whoever it is, what do they have to do in order to prove that they can be the number one and number two corners moving forward?
What they need to prove, I mean, that's up to Steichen and that's up to Bradley to decide. But, I mean, ultimately, it's about which guy shows more promise, because it's impossible to know what these guys are going to provide you. But the ultimate way to try to get the best guy out there is to try to find the guy that shows you the most promise. Does a guy win more reps than he loses? Does the guy have athletic tools that allow you to think that he can do that? We all presume that Juju Brents most likely will be the number one outside corner because that's where you drafted him in the second round for. But, I mean, outside of that, you're right. Who is going to be the guy, right? Darius Rush, who we got in the fifth round, and many people assume that this is a guy that you could have gotten in the third round. You're talking about Jalen Jones, who, was a 4-year starter at Texas A&M. And then a few other guys from your undrafted free agents from last year that, are in their second year in the system that have that experience being there and already understand it, in Dallas Flowers and Tony Brown. Who really opens that up? And it's hard to realize it. I mean, it's just so strange that Kenny Moore is the only corner in this entire team that has more than 1 year's worth of freaking experience on this roster right now. It's just wild. That's going to be the big one, man. That's going to be the big one. The whole way through training camp, everyone's going to be asking, who's doing well at corner? Who's figuring it out? Right now, Juju Brents is not practicing because of, some injuries. But, the rest of the guys are out there. All that's doing is giving Darius Rush and Jalen Jones and a few of these other guys a better chance. Juju Brents is going to be a little bit behind. So Brents is really going to have to pick it up if he wants to be that starter, because he's already missing time.
Yep, for sure. For me, I think it's a bigger question of who responds. Who responds well after some tough moments. Because let's not be acting like this group's going to go out there and be a good group. Let's just be real. It's going to be young. There's going to be, the inexperience is going to show. There's going to be issues with these young corners, as you would have with any young secondary. But I think for me, it's how do you respond after you get beat? How do you respond after you get burned? And so I think that's going to be one of the bigger things that I'm watching is let's be honest, these wide receivers right now in the skill group for the Colts, they have an advantage over these corners because they actually have been in the league and they've played against actual NFL defenses. And so I think that definitely gives them a little bit of a slight advantage over these guys, as young as the wide receivers even are. That's going to be something that's going to be interesting to kind of see is all these corners are probably going to have issues from time to time, their rookie season. But who responds and who comes back, right? I mean, Derek, you remember the name Quincy Wilson. We remember that name. I mean, a guy that just really struggled to bounce back, right? He was just a guy that he would get into his own head way too often. the talent was never in question. It was just up here, and he had issues. And I felt like, I don't, correct me if you disagree with this, I felt like he could have been a very good NFL corner if he just would have gotten out of his own head a lot of times. I felt like the biggest issue with a guy like Quincy Wilson was not talent. It was just the mental aspect of it. When you do get beat, how do you respond? And he just couldn't respond well. But like, that's the big thing. Like, when you get beat, Juju Brents, in your first NFL game, or when you do get back, how do you come back the second rep, the next time? And that's going to be a big thing for me with these young corners, is not perfection, but progress every time. How do these guys progress? Not, are these guys perfect? Because they're not going to be perfect. It's impossible, especially for young players. That's how they grow. They learn. I mean, guys like last year, Bernard Ryman, how did he learn? He learned through going through some hard times, having some rough games. Like, how do these guys do that? They're going to have those moments. So that's what I'm looking for with this young corner group, whoever it is out there in week number 1 and throughout training camp. So that is definitely one for sure. And then obviously the most important one we're going to be watching is the quarterback position. Gardner Minshew took the reps day 1 of training camp. Gardner Minshew was with the ones. Anthony Richardson was with the twos. But this is clearly far from over, Derek. This is going to be one that we're going to be monitoring all throughout camp to see who is the quarterback week number 1 and who is the quarterback through training camp. Does the guard kind of change a little bit? We'll see. And obviously, we've heard things about, the Colts planning to split the reps 50-50. So maybe when they go out there Friday, Richardson is with the ones. We'll see. But regardless, Derek, this quarterback, competition is going to be the biggest position battle that we are watching. And it's really not even close, in my opinion, because that is your franchise right there.
Yep. I mean, this is the big one, and it's going to continue to be a thing. And ultimately, it's going to be the topic of conversation until the season actually starts and we find out who is actually the starting quarterback week 1. And that's going to be the big thing. And at the end of the day, like you said, they're splitting snaps. Obviously, Gardner Minshew first day gets the snaps, and Richardson will probably get his here either on Friday or in the next week. That's obviously something that we will continue to watch every single day. Ultimately, again, don't even really care what reps the Richardson gets in. I just want to make sure that they're good reps one way or another. That's the important thing. And so far, they're off to a good start with it. Just hope that we can continue to see more progress.
Absolutely. So, guys, that is our look at the 5 position battles that we are most interested in for training camp 2023. Let us know your thoughts on these different position battles. Is there another position battle that we didn't touch on that you are interested in watching? Let us know all these things. If you're still watching, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. The views have been down, obviously, with everything, but it feels like, Derek, we're starting to get back into the swing of things with camp. It feels like people are starting to come out of the whole, starting to come out a little bit and actually, wanting more content now that there's actually something to talk about. So if you guys are either new to the channel or if you've been tuning in, be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I know there's a lot of people who watch our videos that aren't subscribed. So if you consider doing that, we would greatly appreciate that. It definitely would be awesome to have you a part of the Bring the Juice community. We would love to have you. And obviously, we're going to keep going, keep rolling with the Colts news, keep rolling with the Colts information. It feels like, Derek, there's always news around this time of year. So be sure, guys, to follow along with what we're doing when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts. This train, the Bring the Juice train, is going to keep rolling. We hope you guys will get on board with what we're doing. So thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate all the support. And as always, guys, go Colts.